Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. I'm Asbed Bedrossian, and this week Asbed Kotchikian and I will talk about topics that have been on our minds recently from around Armenia, the South Caucasus, and the rest of the world. Asbed Kotchikian is an associate professor of political science and international relations at the American University of Armenia. Hello and welcome, Asbed. How are you?
Good, Asbed. How are you doing? Okay, this sounds like an echo, isn't it? Talking to Asbed, one Asbed to the other.
Yes, that's right. This is an Asbed to Asbed conversation. So on September 2nd, Artsakh celebrated its 30th year as an independent entity. I say entity and not country, because it's still not recognized by a single state, not even Armenia. I have a simple question for you. Is this a platform policy or prudent politics?
Well, does it have to be or? It can be both, and it can be neither. But one thing that I have to say, Asbed, in terms of the question that you said, as an entity, even if a country is not recognized, it wouldn't make it less of a state, right?
Yeah.
So it's about recognized versus unrecognized state. And it has been one of the biggest debates in the last 30 years, whether Armenia should recognize Artsakh or not, the Artsakh recognition at a state level in the United States, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I haven't been able to really dwell too much into this and understand what is the added advantage of having a recognized state as Artsakh as a recognized state. And also the fact that Armenia hasn't even recognized it, but they send a delegation, a mixed parliamentary delegation, mixed,
Right.
I mean politically,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
with mixed feelings. Probably they went with mixed feelings as well. But the prime minister didn't show up. Probably, again, I don't think that it is a very smart thing to do these days to show up in Karabakh. But regardless, I mean, 30 years later, 30th anniversary, this is a new phase of Artsakh, be that as an independent or dependent entity or state.
And honestly, even with 2020 hindsight, I'm still not sure if it would have been better to recognize Artsakh at some point, whether it's during the war last year or during some time before that, because I'm not sure what the added value of that recognition would have been or not. I'm not saying we should have or we shouldn't have. Even with 2020 hindsight on the last 30 years, I still am not sure which would have been better.
Right. I mean, it can always be legal, political, social, humanitarian, all those reasons. You can always give one reason or the other to support or refute an argument, right? So,
I mean, during the war, Russia said, well, you didn't recognize it. Not even you believe that this is a different country. But if that's the case, why didn't they send a signal during previous regimes, like during Kocharyan, for example, and say, hey, recognize it, we'll back you. And they didn't do that. So anyway,
correct.
Moving forward, there have been a lot of signals between Turkey and Armenia about restarting discussions about normalizing relations, right? Erdogan has said so, Pashinyan has said so, and now Russia has said so over the last couple of days. We can see everyone dancing around the politics of reconciliation again. So where is this headed? What do you think?
Oh boy, that's a good, very, very good question. One of the interesting things is that when Pashinyan's new government, they announced their 5-year plan, working government plan, there was already chatter coming in from Turkey about whether or not, where it was mentioned in the government plan that normalizing relations with Turkey and so on and so forth. And as the debate was, or the ratification of that agreement was going on in the parliament, in the National Assembly, within a couple of days, Erdogan, who was on a trip to Montenegro, if I'm not mistaken, on the flight back, he made a statement that we're ready to open border, normalize relations as long as Armenia respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity, or mutual sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Right.
Now, okay, so here's the interesting thing. There have been a lot of waves of reconciliation, talks, border opening, whatever you want to call it. They come in different flavors, all of this. But the question is now that Turkey has actually ready to move on from this issue. From Turkish perspective, from Erdogan's perspective, he managed to end up, winning a war.
Right.
He delivered whatever he could do
what
to
does
his
it
ally.
mean for them to move forward or move on from this topic?
It's a pain in their, it's like on the side. They don't want, this is not a priority for them, and they don't want to spend too much time on it. Armenians always think that they are more important to Turkish foreign policy or to Turkey than they actually are. Turkey is like one of the top 20 largest economies in the world. It's expanding its wings left, right, and center, east, west, north, and south, let's call it in this case. So I think from Erdogan's perspective, he had the showcase of his weapons in Karabakh, and he's been selling weapons again to this and that group. And from that perspective, he just wants to remove this issue as solve it, as marked it as solved, tick it as solved. And I wouldn't be surprised if at this point, in the last 20, 25 years, whenever there was an agreement or talk about border opening between Turkey and Armenia, Azerbaijan would always lobby in Ankara against that. And I think this is a point, possibly. Again, this is all based on conjecture, right? We don't have all the facts or inside stories, inside scoops. So it's quite possible that at some point Ankara might say, you know what, Azerbaijan, you guys got what you wanted and then some. I'm going to open the border, whether you
Deal
guys
with your
like it or not.
problems,
Right.
and we're going to take care of our own.
Exactly. And that's a delinking, right? One of the other, actually, now I'm thinking out loud. I'm surprised I didn't think about it earlier. But one of the biggest problems in the previous reconciliation attempts were basically, should we link or delink Karabakh or genocide recognition from relations with Turkey? But Karabakh as well. Now, de facto, that has been delinked. And even at some point, and in a statement, not in the statement, but in an answer to a question to a journalist, Erdogan had mentioned, now that the Armenian occupation of Nagorno-Karabakh has ended, there is no reason to keep the border closed. I came across that in one of the Turkish news sources and so on. So from their perspective, the war is over. From their perspective, the conflict is over. So moving on.
Well, even Aliyev is basically saying so.
Exactly.
But Asbed, one thing that's interesting in this, if they were truly to go forward with this conversation, is Armenia ready to handle a discussion of this caliber?
Okay, so psychologically,
is this government capable of negotiating our side?
Yeah. Okay, so now those are two different questions, right? The first one is that Armenia is ready. Probably they are. Probably Armenia has also been ready since the defeat of the war on this issue, in the sense that not that they're being forced. Probably their hands are weak. Their hand is weak, but also the current leadership of Armenia can go ahead and open the border or normalize relations with Turkey without fear of repercussions domestically. What would the opposition do? It'd say, "Oh, you're a traitor." Where they're already calling them that, or "You're a capitulant." They're already saying that. So the government of Armenia doesn't have anything more to lose by normalizing the relations. Now, if the issue is about the economic consequences, blah blah blah, and so on and so forth, that's a whole different ballgame. But is Armenia, the second part that you said, is Armenia ready to handle such a negotiation? This is where the answer is sorely no. Mostly because of the fact, I think it's about the cadres. It's about the diplomatic corps. It's about negotiation. You open the border, there are so many nuances. There's so many minor minutiae of details. So
you were mentioning earlier that you're not sure they have the software and the hardware to deal with the problem.
Yeah, I mean, the hardware is basically the diplomatic core. The software is about the strategic thinking. What does it mean? What can we get? What is it? What impact will it have on Gyumri? Right? There's the prime city or the largest city there. What would it mean in terms of communication? What would it mean in terms of transportation? In terms of getting stuff from the Black Sea via Georgia or via Trabzon directly? So all of these questions require the software, the thinking in terms of
and the strategy of where we're going.
Yeah, exactly. Like a short-term, mid-term, long-term planning. But at least from the perspective of readiness, at least in terms of if this can be sold or not within Armenia, I think this current government, even though they're defeated, they were reelected by that, they have in that position, from even a position of weakness, they actually have the best chance to go ahead and bulldoze this through the Turkish-Armenian relations, reconciliation, and whatnot, and without extra repercussions.
You are talking about really not having any preconditions, right? For example, not talking about the genocide at this point in time, not linking or talking about Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, just saying Azerbaijan, that's your deal, that's your conversation.
But even Asbed, even if there was a precondition, right? I mean, preconditions are preconditions, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be changed. All conditions change, post conditions change as well. So from this perspective, it's always good to also not look at things in set stone. And I go back to what I said earlier, that in the case of the Armenian mindset, Armenian political mindset, or foreign policy mindset, be that in the diaspora or in Armenia, there are set ideas. Like, okay, instead of Armenia having a conversation with Turkey, they're having a conversation with Turkey in their mind. And they're actually getting angry as to why isn't Turkey responding the way they do. So, but you cannot, you cannot build relationship. This is in no way I'm saying what the definition
You
would
can't
be.
have a hypothetical relationship.
Yeah, well, a platonic hypothetical relationship, right?
Right.
Probably in this case. So it's all about. It comes down to that you actually have to go ahead and have a discussion, have a dialogue to be able to do that. Conditions,
Okay.
preconditions put aside.
Asbed, recently in one of our conversations, I had asked Benjamin Bedrossian what Russia's and what Turkey's goals were in the South Caucasus post-war. I had in mind whether one country or the other wants to see the other one removed from the region. He said actually they want to be connected. They want to be connected
Hmm.
more, and not
Right.
not just through Georgia, because they are concerned that Georgia could be under the influence of the West, and they didn't want any such countries in the middle. So a connectivity through Armenia would be great for both countries.
Exactly.
What do you think about, especially from a regional cooperation, which may or may not include Georgia? How would they respond, and what does it
Yeah.
mean for the region?
In Erdogan's statement about Armenia on the airplane, I'm sort of stuck on that part that he made the statement on an airplane
Yes,
coming back
sometimes it
from
works that
Montenegro. Sort
way.
of, it's like, yeah, but sometimes things don't just happen. It happens for a reason. It's also about optics. But he did mention that we are pushing forward for regional cooperation, 5 and/or 6 countries. So there's always that and that they added, leaving Georgia optional.
Hmm.
Obviously, the ball is in Georgia's court. You're absolutely right. And Benjamin had pointed it out that really Georgia is so entrenched with the West and within the Western sort of security network, let's call it. They see their future with the West.
Hmm.
And in the past, that was okay when Turkey was buddies with the West, but that has changed as well. So now Russia and Turkey are, they're frenemies. They are trying to,
Yes.
they're cooperating more than they're actually antagonistic. And Georgia is sort of stuck in the middle. They're in a pickle. And if all of these regional cooperation happen, hypotheticals, right? They end up opening the border, normalizing, and traffic flows from Turkey to Azerbaijan, or from Russia to Iran via Azerbaijan, Armenia, and so on and so forth. Georgia will become completely irrelevant. Probably the first time in the last 30 years. Well, let's remove the first 5 years where there was civil war instability in Georgia. In the last 25 years, Georgia has become probably more isolated. In other words, Armenia and Georgia are swapping roles now, or
Right.
positions now,
And
where
this is
Armenia
very
used to be more
interesting.
isolated. It is very interesting, and it offers a great opportunity for Armenia as well to actually say, you know what, the Georgians, if we're going to talk about regional cooperation, we have to include Georgia. We need to
Hmm.
be more conciliatory towards Georgia and include it. Yes, Russians, we know that you don't like them, but again, I'm simplifying. This is not the language, obviously,
Sure.
diplomats talk. But I think this could also provide an opportunity to create a small sort of a front, quote unquote, like within the South Caucasus, new regional sort of status, or the new regional dynamic.
Well, Georgia is not only isolated, but for example, the region of Ajaria is heavily Turkish influenced at this point, almost to the point of being like a joint exclave of Turkey.
Yeah, well, it used to be right under Aslan Abashidze,
Yeah.
who actually ran the place as a fiefdom. He brought in a lot of investments, and don't forget that the Russians had a base actually there for the longest time
Hmm.
in Ajaria. And I mean, Ajaria or the Batumi is like the Vegas of the South Caucasus. Anything that happens in Batumi stays in Batumi. You see cars with Turkish license plates, with Azeri license plates, with Armenian license plates, Georgian, Russian. Well, not so much Russian. So it is a major port, commercial and touristic. They have these big hotels, the big casinos, and people from Turkey where they don't have opportunities to enjoy the nightlife in that way, in terms of gambling, drinking, and partying, and so on and so forth. Which then, that's an obvious choice for them. Economically, they might be viable. They might have all the things coming in, money flowing. But at the end of the day, it's not just about the economy. Unlike what the old adage goes, it's the economy, stupid. It's not only.
Yeah.
It's also about where do you fit in the larger context? Armenia has always been labeled as disruptor in the region, and now would Georgia take on that title or honor? Let's
Or
call it.
privilege, indeed. Okay, Asbed, great. Moving on, what's been on your mind lately? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, recently I have been following a lot about what's happening in Afghanistan
Hmm.
in terms of also overall international political processes with a couple of major shifts, I think, coming up our way internationally, be that in Europe, the United States, or regionally. So
Mhm.
we can tackle those.
What do you want to say about Afghanistan? For example, so this
It's
is
a beautiful place. It's a beautiful country. That's what I
September
want to say.
3rd and 4th, and the US just left on
Right,
August 31st. You know,
right.
the whole world has been covering how much of a messy departure it was. Getting past those logistics, what do you
Mhm.
think the US has learned from these 20 years, and what do you think the Taliban has learned from it?
Well, the US, I would say, if they have learned anything, it's not much because they've kept repeating what they've done in Vietnam, right? This is more or less the same thing, or in Iraq for that matter.
Well,
I
I was
think
especially
what
struck by how similar Biden's parting speech was to George W. Bush's 20 years ago, saying things like, we will hunt you down, we will punish you, and so on. So it seems to me that in 20 years of pointless and very expensive war, the US
Right,
hasn't really
right.
changed its tune as they leave Afghanistan defeated.
With a bang. I mean,
Yeah.
he's trying to leave with a bang, right? He's trying not as a defeat. It's always about selling anything that you do in a different way than it actually is.
Hmm.
It is probably a defeat. Not in a classic way that the American military has been defeated and so on and so forth, but it was a defeat of American policy about dealing with the Taliban, and this has been in place since Trump, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and that's the beauty of American foreign policy. I find it quite interesting that no matter where you are ideologically, when a new president comes in, sometimes they would pick up some of the policies that the previous president came up with and say, okay, they already started this. Why not just finish it? That was Trump's approach. And now that withdrawal actually from Afghanistan, it's quite interesting to see who's filling in the vacuum
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
terms of who's going to be present. Now, the Taliban themselves, right? This is not the same Taliban as they were before. They learned a lot. They know now that if you harbor terrorists and so on, they're going to come after you. You don't need to create another excuse or pretext for international involvement in the region. But
So
as
does
of
this mean
now,
they're going to become a target to terrorist groups themselves?
I wouldn't put past that. I mean, I'm not excluding that. It is quite possible. Again, I've mentioned this before. The Taliban never actually had any expansionist policy. They never attacked any other country in the region.
Yeah,
They were
that's
just
right.
interested in terrorizing their own people in terms of controlling their own Afghanistan, and they just happened to have an alliance or a marriage of convenience with Al Qaeda at the time. Now, I think they are more because of their rule and their intolerance towards any kind of a dissent. They're not going to allow any kind of ISIL or Al Qaeda to take over. Not to mention also the fact that they do have a small problem now, and by small, I'm not underestimating it, but it is small. There is the region of Panjshir, which is just northeast of Kabul,
Hmm.
which is traditionally the stronghold of the Mujahideen from Afghanistan from the time of the Soviet invasion. Some people might remember Ahmad Shah Massoud, the guy who was assassinated 2 days before 9/11. He was the leader of the Taliban resistance. His son
Hmm.
has taken over now, and he's in collaboration with so-called acting president of Afghanistan, Amrullah Saleh, and they're offering some resistance, heavy fighting going on there. But that's more of a priority to the Afghan than to harbor ISIL and ISIS or Al Qaeda and so on and so forth. So it's quite interesting to see how things are going to develop. And one final thing about this is that I've been following it, how Moscow actually has reopened its embassy and it's operating
That's
normally
right.
as if
That's
it's
right.
business as usual. Even they changed the language, right? At some point, like 2 months ago, they would be referring to the Taliban as terrorists. Now
Hmm.
they're referred to them as fundamentalists. So, it's a, I don't know, step up or step
And
down,
I'm
no
not
matter
aware
how you
that
look at
China
it.
has done the same, but China is also talking to them.
Right, always. And also Turkey.
Yeah.
See, Turkey was given the protection of the airport. And they actually said, okay, we're handing back to Afghanistan. They're a sovereign country. And we're going to go back and operate our diplomatic operations from the embassy in Kabul rather than because most of the Western embassies were operating from the airport in the last couple of weeks. So,
So,
and Qatar as well.
so Asbed,
Yeah.
in all these events, in all these
Mhm.
affairs, I think there was a note from the Armenian foreign minister that they are watching Afghanistan very closely. What is Armenia's interest and concern about this part of the world? What aspect of this conflict is interesting to Armenia?
Well, I would say it's a platonic interest, like we were talking, since been using that word. But thinking overall, I mean, one thing I have to think about, that first thing that comes to my mind is the issue of probably refugees passing through Armenia.
Hmm.
Possibly. This is one of the also major concerns in Turkey and Iran now in terms of having accommodating refugees. But I wouldn't put, mean, I have to admit that the question, I'm just thinking about it out loud now
Hmm.
about your question, but it is also possible that how Turkey is reacting, what would the role of Turkey, if any, would be in Afghanistan? You know, the Taliban
Yes.
representatives have said that we want to cooperate with Turkey and so on and so forth. Does that mean Turkey will have a increased influence in the region? And what would it be? Even though there is a huge backlash, by the way, in Turkey about that. A
There
lot
is,
of
and they have not been welcoming
tweeting
for,
going on.
they haven't been very welcoming
Exactly.
to Afghani refugees. In fact, downright
Not only the
hostile as
Afghani
far as I
refugees,
know.
but well, they're always, it's the same case with the Syrian refugees and
Hmm.
so on in Turkey. But Erdogan is probably trying, it's part of Erdogan's larger plan, right? It's his like flexing his muscles, Turkey's muscles. You know, he had a successful war. He is present. He's the very few remaining linkages, let's say, between the West and the Taliban. You know, Syria, Iraq, put that aside.
Hmm.
Talk about Libya, to what extent they are still involved. That's another dimension. You know, being present in Ukraine, selling weapons here and there. It's like this is a Turkish renaissance, like Turkish foreign policy, imperialism,
Hmm.
expansionism, which, you know, honestly, if I were Turkish citizen, whether I liked Erdogan or not, I would have been proud of my country, thinking, wow, you know, we're all over we're in the news. It's not
Hmm.
just that we are just fighting or dealing with the Kurds and this and that. We're in Central Asia, we're in Ukraine, we're in the Baltics. So this is a revival of the Ottoman Empire, and I wouldn't be surprised for people who actually follow Turkish politics to see a lot of analogies made probably in terms of the new imperial dawn, Turkish imperial dawn
Still,
or
their
something.
policy is confusing and sometimes opportunistic, in my opinion. They're selling drones to any country that'll buy them, especially countries lining along Russia's southern
Right,
underbelly, like Estonia, Poland, Ukraine, Central Asia. They'll probably deploy their drones in Afghanistan.
right.
Meanwhile, they buy S-400s from Russia, and Russia's happy to sell it to them. Earlier, you said frenemies. That is so
Right,
applicable.
right.
What is this relationship about? What are the
There's a
policies
method to
behind them?
madness. You know, there's a method to madness here. So I think, you know, it might not. See, this comes back to the issue, right? You know, we see what we see. It's like the iceberg. We see
Uh-huh.
only the tip of the iceberg, but what goes on beneath? What are the deals that being made? What is Erdogan's end game? What is his like a strategy? And I do think that he's a He does have a strategy. He does
Mm-hmm.
have a vision, and all of this is coming together. The only thing is that, you know, as political analysts, is to look at these things and, you know, over time build that body of knowledge and start making connections. Oh, so, you know, when he sold weapons to Poland, and a year later there's an agreement between, I don't know, free movement of goods or whatever it is between Poland and so this is what it meant. Or even maybe it could be, again, I'm hypothesizing here and just throwing out there. I don't think that's a possibility, but this might also be a way to dismantle NATO or weaken NATO, with Poland thinking, okay, I know I can't get anything from NATO specifically, but Turkey, who's also a NATO ally, but I will do bilateral agreements. I will have bilateral agreements with
Mm-hmm.
Turkey about these things. So many things to look, but I don't think that it's confusing because we don't have all the data. We don't have all the information. But at the end of the day, it is method to madness, I think.
So, where does this leave the state of world affairs, especially in light of what you just
Oh,
said? I mean, we have the whole U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's almost a little bit isolationist. It seems like the U.S. has withdrawn into,
right,
looking at its own belly. Meanwhile, there are
right,
upcoming elections in Germany, France trying to take the lead. What's
right.
going on? Is this a renaissance of world
Well,
politics?
it's a restructuring of world politics, I think, and it's happening quite fast, I would say. You know, when you look at transitions in terms of major shifts, it takes a couple of years. Well, it has been a couple of years, so it's not as fast as I thought it would be. But you know, a couple of things here. Right? With Trump's presidency, followed by COVID, and then we're witnessing all of these, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, withdrawal from Afghanistan, COVID resurging, and also Europe actually has come to the realization at this point that, especially after withdrawal, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, that they need to get their act together and think about a collective security which is based on the continental Europe,
Right.
since Britain is also out. Now, Germany has upcoming elections. That's going to be quite interesting. And Germans have actually been very pissed about the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Don't forget that this is the first time, Afghanistan was the first time that German troops were deployed outside of Germany since the Second World War. And that was a major gamble for them to show that they are a team player and so on. And now they're coming back, and not in a successful way, or not in a mission accomplished, we won kind of a way. So that is going to be one of the probably election challenges in Germany. The poll results in Germany are not clear cut as to who's going to win. Probably there will be coalition again among several parties. Meanwhile, the center right or right party, the Alternative for Germany, has been more vocal in terms of what they want to see Europe more isolated. So isolationism is going there. On the other hand, Macron, who doesn't have to face election until next year, he feels that this is an opportunity to make France great again. So in terms of, U.S. withdrawal from the region, remember last year France had sent, its navy to the Eastern Mediterranean among tension within the context of tension that was taking place between Turkey and Greece and Cyprus and so on and so forth. So all of these, on the one hand, COVID coming back, and even the promise or the potential that some countries like the US or China might be witnessing a resurgence or a rebound of the economy. The global economy is something that is going to actually lag. It's going to limp for a while. And all this also provide opportunities for countries like Turkey or mid-range powers to actually, play the field. This is like the perfect environment for Russia and Turkey. This is why they see that this is a strategic opportunity, time-wise, to reclaim some of their glory without actual interference, direct interference from Europe or from the United States.
One idea that's been on my mind is whether we're seeing a shift in global politics moving away from a bipolar, superpower-dominated politics towards a more regional power-dominated landscape.
It has always been like that.
We used to think of most conflicts as proxy wars between local players who ultimately rolled up to different superpowers, right? But now, instead of a world dominated by the US or China, for example, we have the Turkeys, Russias, Irans operating with greater facility and maybe with greater autonomy. What do you think?
Right. I think Asbed, listen, I think the issue is not that it's more or less. The problem is on the regional scale. I believe there have always been those regional dynamics. The problem or the reason why these are accentuated now is because of the fact that the superpowers, let's say, the overarching blanket of superpowers and so on are withdrawn. So that's why it highlights the regional presence of Iran, Turkey, Russia, and so on and so forth. So it all depends on the cycle. Like some international relations theorists actually argue that the world system is in a cycle. I don't know what cycle it is. I don't know how long it takes. You see the cycles going where you have several great powers dominating and then withdrawing, two coming up and then going, three coming up and then going. I don't know what would it be now or what is the cycle, where in the cycle we are. But the fact that you have the global economy, as I said, brought down on its knees sort of because of COVID, the increased travel restrictions. The EU just actually had travel restrictions, issued travel restrictions against Americans or Americans coming in from the US. So all of these actually, as I said, accentuate or highlight relationship and provide opportunities. While they provide limits or they create limits for interactions, but they also provide opportunities for other interactions among other countries. And this is where it goes back to Russia and Turkey, right? Turkey is selling weapons to, quote unquote, as you put it, Russia's underbelly, countries in the Russian underbelly, and they're also buying weapons from Russia. And Russia and Turkey seem to be meeting eye to eye in the South Caucasus. When yesterday or the day before, Maria Zakharova, she made an announcement saying that, we're following the Armenian-Turkish relations and we're ready to support it. I mean, this is as much support as you would get publicly from Russia on Turkish-Armenian reconciliation. So, as I said, opportunities, and they're taking advantage of that. I mean, Putin and Erdogan and probably others as well, but we're talking regionally, other leaders as well, they are observing. They know how to bid their time and how to take advantage of changing geopolitical, regional, or even international mood and environment.
Sure, I agree with your assessment. So as a side thought, I've been considering that along with many industries, Technology is disrupting world politics through the democratization of the high-tech military-industrial complex, making any state with high-tech weaponry feel entitled to a say in the new world order.
I cannot stop but thinking about Aldous Huxley. I know there's not a lot of parallels in that, but or not, but it is a brave new world.
Yeah,
It is a brave new world
yeah,
where the boundaries between technology, economy, war, banking, politics, you name it, health, it's like blending. Yes, technology is the overarching sort of connector, but it is, we. This is where I was talking earlier about foreign policy having software. This is also part of it to have that flexibility. You cannot operate in the context that you were before. You cannot develop, a foreign policy or even a strategy like you would do in a classic foreign policy, diplomatic foreign ministry context. It is a brave new world, and it does require a brave new thinking in many, many
absolutely.
respects.
Actually, that was my next question. With a complex political world like this, is the world of political analysis keeping up with it?
Unfortunately, not. Humans, like bureaucracy and organizations, have difficulty in adjusting to realities, to things that you're accustomed to, right? Probably most of the listeners would relate to this if they're coffee drinkers. You wake up in the morning and you would have your coffee, you would think about or read the news or this and that. Imagine I would say, there's a coffee shortage, you're not going to be able to do that. And then you can still imagine that you're doing the same thing or analyzing everything from the perspective that I have to look at the news by drinking my coffee. Now, political analysis, this is the field that everyone has an opinion about, and they have the right to have an opinion. It affects their lives. And
Sure.
unfortunately, on a meta level, it takes place on a meta level where most people do not have the means to connect things. And by saying connections, a lot of people make connections, and that's what it's a borderline conspiracy theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
You make connections where otherwise there aren't any, and it becomes a conspiracy theory. Vaxxers and anti-vaxxers and like microchips or whatnot, to follow you, for instance. But it is a major, major challenge. And I think I mentioned this earlier in our earlier conversation today, that in order for you to have any scientifically and as close as you can get to science, right? The
Mm-hmm.
analysis, political analysis, you need to have the facts. If you don't have the facts, then what you're doing is guessing. And this is why I always try to have that disclaimer that as far as I can see, as far as the evidence is out there, this is the analysis that I have. I will be wrong. Yes, I will be wrong. This is a science or this is a field that
Mm-hmm.
you make wrongs, a lot of mistakes, but no one would ever would say mea culpa. My bad, sorry, it was an analysis, or just shut the fuck up. Don't, make grand statements. Don't make grand statements just because you want people to hear, oh, I think Armenia is going to have a great army in 20 years. What is the evidence? Or I think Turkey is going to invade Armenia. Where is the evidence? I mean, if I were to look at the facts, I would say that there's less of a chance Turkey invading than there was a year ago or 2 years ago. But that's again an approach. Now that doesn't mean that everyone has to think the same way,
Mm-hmm.
but at least everyone has to use the same facts that they have, and base their judgment or assessment accordingly. At least you will have a common denominator, and you can have a discussion which is at par with each other,
Yeah.
rather than one talking about baby elephants and the other one talking about kittens, and coming to a conclusion that animals are cute. Yes, overall they are.
Since you dropped the F bomb, I'll drop another F,
Uh-huh.
about fake news. You said that if you have the
Ah,
facts, right? But in this world of a
right.
lot of alternative facts, let's say, where you don't know the real news from the fake news, how can we weed through the forest of news to understand what is the reality, the
Yeah.
real news?
That is my main dilemma, but that is my main concern. One of the major issues that I've had, I mean, I've been following news for the last 20, 25 years, just out of interest, just being a political animal.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, you didn't have the amount of information, so it was much easy to keep up with what's happening. And actually, the world was less of a depressing place, because now with the media, you can hear, and media always focuses on bad news. So
Right.
you turn the video on and you see, floods here, fire there, killing here. You want to run away and look at, puppies playing on YouTube so that you could just get some sense of optimism. But overall, my approach, the problem is that not a lot of people do this, but my approach is to identify a couple of news sources
Mm-hmm.
which actually do a decent job in reporting, and rely on them, because unlike the past, we can't go and filter what is real news, what is what is bad news, what is fake news, and so on and so forth. However, even if you choose those news sources, you might end up, with a grain of salt. Take it with a grain of salt. It means saying that, okay, they have their ideological goals or the ideological agenda. They have shown some bias before. But I am okay with looking at the fact. Now, I'm going to say something that not a
And
lot
as
of people.
long as you know those biases.
Right,
Right.
exactly. But I'm there to get information. For instance, I always encourage my students, and I always look at the BBC News online for information. And one of the things I like about sources like the BBC and a couple of other places is that they have two sections. They have the a non-editorialized news. This happened, that happened, and so on, which itself has some bias, right? Because they might not choose not to cover some stories. But it's just basic fact, almost like a bullet point that this is what's happening. Now, in that they spice it up with like links to analysis. I don't go to the analysis. I just look at the facts. So I know that Afghanistan, like for instance, the U.S. is withdrawing from Afghanistan. That's a fact. Now, the analysis of why they're doing it, what would the repercussions be, a dime a dozen, right? You will have so many
There
analyses
are
there.
a lot,
Also, the
yes.
trick here is not to depend on a sole source. This is where a lot of people fall into the trap of, generating or listening to the news that they want to hear.
Yeah.
It's not what the news that is happening, but what they want to hear. And I mean, more and more I see analyses, political analysts talking about this and that in general in such generic way, but in such also generic, also superficial way. It always reminds me, maybe I don't want to go on ranting on this, but it always reminds me of this conversation, an interview that Noam Chomsky was having with a reporter. A reporter asks him, could you please in 5 minutes explain to us the Arab-Israeli conflict? Chomsky turns around and says, you know what? No, I'm not going to do that. The reporter is taken aback and says, what do you mean? He says, listen, you want me to bring down a century-old conflict into a soundbite? I'm not going to do that. If you want me to explain things, give me half an hour at least to really just sketch you what it is. Otherwise, I'm not going to simplify things. Policymakers, political analysts, they don't have the time. This is part of the changing brave new world as well, right? Things move fast and faster.
Yeah, and
So you
there's
need to
less
make
and
a
less time
fast
for it.
decision.
Yeah.
Exactly. But the quality of the research, the depth of understanding changes.
Maybe
And
even
this
the
is a
depth
body
of
of
policy
knowledge.
making.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is perhaps the reason why, it's so easy to analyze, it's so easy to make statements like this. You see so many political quote unquote analysts, self-proclaimed analysts about this. They want to please, they want to say things that everyone wants to hear, or make a sensational statement as well, right? So that's also, I mean, the news and analysis has lost its meaning, and it's always tainted. No one is objective. It's impossible. If someone says they're objective, they're bullshitting, they're lying. You can try to be as less subjective as possible, but at the end of the day, you need to have the facts. You need to have the information. You need to do the homework. Not everyone has the free time to go and study primary document. Not everyone is going to go and read the details of an agreement or details of a policy and so on. We always rely on that. Oh, the government presented a new budget, the annual budget and so on. Let me go and read through one by one what it means, and so on and so forth. The government people, the legislatures don't do that anymore, let alone the layperson. But that's the nature of the changing world. And how do you do that? It's a major challenge. This is why I'm always hesitant to provide analyses and so on quite often, mostly because of the fact that how much more can you say about the same issue for the nth time?
Yeah.
What new can you bring? What novelty can you bring in? So that's unfortunately part of the brave new world. Exciting, yet
Oh,
frustrating as well.
definitely, and both. Well, this conversation has been much more like one of our coffee or scotch conversations than a weekend review. All right, Asbed Kotchikian, we'll leave it here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asbed Bedrossian. It was very fun to talk. Cheers.
Talk to you soon. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Well, that was our weekend review show, and we hope it helped you catch up with some of the issues in and around Armenia from this past week. As always, we invite your feedback and your suggestions. You can find us on most social media and podcast platforms, or our website, groong.org. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a great week Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, like our pages, and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.